Recently, I made my Watcher critique in which I try to explain why the story isn't actually that good. So I suppose the next thing I should talk about would be the second Rainbow DLC, Downpour, because it's not really that good as well, and today I'm here to talk about it. But remember, just like with the Watcher video, I am not coming from a place of malice. I don't hate Downpour. I am simply here to analyze the DLC and try to point out its flaws because I enjoy doing so. Now, unlike with The Watcher, criticizing Downpour is kind of uncharted territory. There aren't really that many videos about it. Pretty much the only video I found was that one from like 2 years ago from Sorbet Cafe, which I watched. Not gonna lie, this might be in the top 3 of the worst YouTube videos I have ever seen in my entire life. If you were to play a drinking game where you take a shot every time Sorbet Cafe says the words feels like, you would actually fucking die in the first 7 minutes. Yeah, I didn't think it was very good. I mean, Sorbet Cafe makes some good points, but it's still pretty bad overall, and I will bring up this video later to dispel or make certain criticisms. Unlike the Watcher video, I would dissect each Downpour campaign individually, because they all have interesting things to talk about in them, and widely different issues to address. However, before we get into that, I want to set some ground rules for this video and how I choose to talk about this DLC. No, I do not give a single shit about who made Downpour, how much contact they had with the original creators, or who they were. I will always uphold that we should judge media based on its quality and not some arbitrary metrics like who the creators of it were. The original creators are not infallible gods. Just because they make something doesn't make it good, as was proven with The Watcher. And just because someone else made Downpour does not make it bad. There's also the whole "it feels like fanfiction" thing. Fanfiction can still be objectively good. It doesn't by itself mean it's bad. It's also kinda subjective as well. What you think feels like fanfiction could not feel like fanfiction to someone else. Like, I don't engage with this type of work pretty much ever, so I can't really compare the two. This also goes for the "it doesn't feel like Rainworld" argument. What you like about Rainworld and what you would consider to quote-unquote feel like Rainworld is completely subjective and should not be taken into account when criticizing anything. Nor does it automatically make the piece of media in question bad. Point out how a thing contradicts something else, please. And lastly, just because I can agree with some people that Downpour isn't all that good, it does not mean I agree with every single argument they might make. Criticism can still be objectively wrong if it doesn't take into account major details or context, which is why I will dismantle some of these arguments when given the chance. Also, no, Downpour taking place in a different canon does not excuse inconsistencies with the base game. The DLC directly mentions events from the base game and is very much trying to fit into its world and story. It was very clearly made with the intention of being canon to the base game. So with all of that said, let's actually start. Now, Gourmand is a really interesting Slack to talk about. When it comes to its gameplay, I don't think it's bad. You are forced to use your wit and intelligence to overcome its challenges. Creature encounters require more thinking. You can't really just throw yourself into danger and walk off fine, due to the fact that you will get tired pretty easily. I like the food quest. I think having you eat a bunch of types of food to complete the campaign is a really cool idea. Now yes, you can craft a bunch of them, but an average player wouldn't really know the crafting system all that well, and it encourages experimentation in a very cool way. And the Slackat's abilities are actually explained for once. Gourmand is so overpowered because the campaign is simply an over-exaggerated retelling of it done by the Slackat's Outer Expanse. This campaign also has the exclusive Outer Expanse region. I mean, it's not really exclusive, but you get my point. My main problem with it is that it can be very hard to see sometimes, since there is a lot of visual clutter in the region, like the mud tunnels on the left side of the region or the plants and stuff. It also doesn't help that the color palette is very close to Gourmand's colors, which can make it very hard to know what's going on. I don't really have a problem with the Yeeks either. They're pretty much one of the few unique creatures that DLC adds that are actually good and useful. The left side of the region isn't really good to play through though, and that's due to a single creature called Jungle Leeches. They are terrible. Not only do they stop you from being able to progress, they catch onto you for like 10 minutes, and they take away your food pips. Leeches went from just being a threat that isn't dangerous on land to being able to hinder your progress both on land and in water. I am not explaining why waiting multiple minutes in one place because a single jungle leech latched onto me is bad. Creatures like that could work in a campaign like Rivulet, but they don't work in Gourmand. The final creature introduced by the campaign that's also used everywhere else is the Caramel Lizard. They are just stronger green lizards, and they are pretty good. We really needed a lizard variant stronger than the green lizard that also plays similar to it. But the world is where my problems really begin. The very idea of the retaining wall and the facility routes completely destroys almost every single campaign in the game. Let's start with the facility route since that's the bigger issue. How did Survivor and Monk never meet each other in this small ass area with precisely one shelter? It's literally impossible for them not to meet. Why is the campaign framing it as though Monk is searching for Survivor when they already had to find each other? I have no idea how to do the text, so I'm just going to read this out. I'm well aware that there is a big time skip between Survivor and Monk's intro and the start of the game. Don't think too much about it. Just enjoy this reference as a cool little Easter egg. I am not going to simply shut my brain off to enjoy the DLC. How am I supposed to not think about it when it damages the base game? In fact, this makes it even worse because now they were aware that it damages previous campaigns and just didn't do anything about it. I don't hate the idea of connecting Gourmand's and Survivor's campaigns. It's just that I was executed very badly and damaged Survivor and Monk as a result. I find it incredibly contrived that this specific hole now leads to an area that happens to lead to outskirts with a whole system and a karma gate. Like, before I was assuming that Survivor simply fell into a random pit and happened to be washed up in some place where he grew up and then ended up in outskirts. But now you're telling me that this hole leads to this area specifically, and that the accident that happened to Survivor is 100% replicable, and that anyone who jumps down this hole will end up in this place. It isn't random anymore. This is made even worse by Spearmaster because it solidifies that this is a viable entrance to outskirts that an iterator like 7 Red Suns would want to use. Also, why didn't Five Fellows lock the other gate along with this one? How did he not think that maybe he should also close it because something might get in? I thought he was supposed to be smart or something. I was also thinking how every other Slack cat managed to enter Pebbles' grounds, like Hunter and Artificer. The outer expanse gate is locked. Hunter starts from Farmer is going from the left, so it's not like he came in through this gate. Actually, as I was reading the wiki, I came across the fact that Hunter starts with some of the map already discovered, specifically the part above this room with the scaffold. Look at this, the base game actually accounting for the fact that Hunter's path is very different from that of Survivor, and that was before the retaining walls was even a thing. I doubt Artificer will be able to make it through this gate due to the large amount of water there is to swim through. Matter of fact, how did Gourmand get in? If you want to tell me he also used this gate, you can fuck right off. The retaining wall is pointless. Why would you even establish that as an issue if you're just gonna ignore it for every other campaign in the game? The only reason for adding this is so that Gourmand can simply go to the ending without visiting 5 Pebbles, and to allow the alternative Survivor and Monk endings to exist. But if adding the wall is the only way you can make that happen, then just don't have that exist. I'm serious, just don't do that if you're gonna mess it up this bad. I was also thinking that they probably did it to justify why all the other Slack cats don't go there, like Hunter, Artificer, and Spearmaster, but you wouldn't even have to close the gate for them. Just have it be so that when they reach the Slack cat tree, all the skags hide and there isn't an ending, so that there's nothing there for them. Kinda like in Safari mode. Maybe you could even have Pebbles and Artificer and Moon Spearmaster read the Outer Expanse Pearl, so that there's something there. And then you could have Reveal and Saint stay exactly the same. And you could still have the Survivor and Monk endings. The retaining wall and facility routes make no sense and make me ask questions about the most basic stuff, like how did the Slack cats even get to 5 Pebbles' grounds? So I would have just removed them both from the DLC and restructured it to actually make sense. So I talked all of that just about Outer Expanse, but I didn't really talk about any of the characters yet. Well, for this campaign, there is only one important character to talk about, Gourmand. You see, I find Gourmand's character to be very interesting in its simplicity. He's simply a Slack cat that begins an expedition to find more food for his fellow Slack cats. Gourmand does not care about the cycles or karma or iterators or any of that other stuff. He enjoys the simple pleasures in life. Gourmand is the perfect example of an insignificant creature, and while that idea is very cool, it's also kinda undermined by the fact that we have to meet 5 Pebbles to beat the campaign. Wouldn't it hit infinitely harder if Gourmand was the one Slack cat to not meet Pebbles or Moon? Or you still could, but they wouldn't do anything or be of help. Have Pebbles give you the mark but not unlock the Outer Expanse gate, which would actually be another reason to remove the retaining wall. Maybe he could still tell you to go to Outer Expanse or something, but not be necessary to find. The food quest already leads you to Subterranean with the Guidak and Red Centipede, So all you would have to do from there would be to lead you to find the outer expanse gate somehow. I was thinking to maybe have a dream of the gate, similar to how Survivor was dreaming about the Void Sea, and urge you to explore the region a bit more. And the pipe with the shelter being changed would be pretty eye-catching. Let's talk about Hunter next. Here I actually want to defend the DLC from a bad criticism of it I've heard that somehow wasn't already debunked despite it being like 3 years. That's the whole Hunter doesn't actually have the rod and so Hunter Longlegs makes no sense thing. Let me tell you how bad this theory is. Well, the main thing comes from Pebbles' dialogue. Upon coming to him without the neuron, he says, "You seem to have been in contact with an iterator before, so perhaps you're already aware. You and I have something in common, little creature. We both have something unfortunate growing in us." I have no idea how you could interpret this any other way than Five Pebbles highlighting the similarity between him and Hunter. He explicitly uses the words growing in us. What other thing could this mean other than that they both have the rot growing in them? He uses the words unfortunate for Christ's sake. Unfortunate. Do you think this choice of wording is accidental? Seriously. In fact, no significant harassment explicitly states that the state of Hunter is due to him not being created properly, due to eroding equipment, and not some bullshit about him being karmically imbalanced. What the fuck does that even mean? I'm being so deadass when I say that I couldn't find out what they're even referencing with this shit. You know, for a community that supposedly prides itself on taking every little detail into account when making theories, we really missed this one, didn't we? Another thing I want to talk about are the slug pups and how they don't make sense. How do slug pups even exist in Gourmand and Hunter? Hunter takes place before Gourmand, so I have no idea as to how the slug pups even got here to begin with. Which is yet another problem with the retaining wall. The slug pups couldn't have gotten here because the gate is still locked. And how are they even in Gourmand? Like, they also got there before Gourmand, so the gate was closed. It makes sense for Survivor though. Why not have them be in like Monk or something? Like, that would actually make sense. It may not be great from a gameplay perspective, but at least it doesn't create issues with the story. And with that, I feel like I touched about everything big and small related to the Gourmand campaign.
Who did you lose? Huh? Was it someone you loved? Well, boo-hoo. Let me tell you something, buddy. Everybody's lost someone. Doesn't mean you have to do this.
This is the base campaign solely because it doesn't have as many issues as all the others. So Artificer has some pretty good gameplay. There are some issues because of the camera with scavengers being able to kill you off screen, but it's not that big of a deal. Her abilities are handled well and take advantage of the combat system in a way no other Slack cat does. The decision to make her permanently stuck at Karma 1 was a good move. It makes the campaign way less punishing, and that's good. You will be dying a lot. Plus, having Scavenger's corpses open gates is a good way to make you engage with the combat more. I want to defend the DLC again because I've commonly heard the complaint of the slug cats are too overpowered, and I don't think it's a good point at all. What a major amount of people don't mention is that the world states of those campaigns are directly made to test your abilities. Gourmand can kill everything, but he gets tired after every spear throw and can't do anything in a weakened state. Artificer is a death machine, but needs to use her abilities to face off against large quantities of very deadly creatures. Rivulet is fast and agile, but has a way shorter rain timer, and while grabbing the refraction cell does reset it back to normal, he then has to venture to a region almost completely submerged in water, that's challenging to traverse even with his increased lung capacity. And all of that while two of your hands are being constantly taken up by the cell. Speedmaster may not be overpowered, but he still has to hold the pearl for like half of the campaign, which takes up one of his hands, along with having way harder creature spawns. Saints does have the tongue, and while it does allow you to outwit most creatures, you can't fight or eat meat while being way weaker. Avoiding creatures is your only option. But that doesn't take into account situations where, for example, there isn't any ceiling in the room you're in. What if you're in a tight tunnel or something? After gaining Karma 10, you gain the powers of Flight and Instakill, but with them, you're supposed to go to the hardest region in the game that's impossible to traverse without them. Like, yes, on their own, these abilities are overpowered, but that's because they are made to work in their respective campaigns. Imagine if you played Hunter, but without the harder creature spawns. And this once again looks back to the it doesn't feel like Rain World thing, which I won't talk about. This argument is often brought up along with the slug cats aren't supposed to be important to a story thing, which, sure, I'm glad you think that, but that's subjective again. I would actually argue that the slug cats being overpowered doesn't undermine their place in the story. The thing with Survivor and Monk is that they are just average slug cats, they are the rule. But that doesn't mean that every slug cat is like Survivor or Monk. Having all of these exceptions, all these slug cats with special abilities, isn't a detriment to the base game's campaign, it's complementary to them. Most slugs are important, but there are some that aren't. We are focusing on them because they aren't like the base game's campaigns. And even then, as Skak having special powers does not mean they are important to the story. Both Gourmand's and Artificer's actions don't have major consequences in their respective campaigns. With all that said, you need to be extra careful about how you integrate those special abilities, otherwise you will create problems with the story and make me question a few things. Gourmand does a good job of this. The campaign is a retelling of the actual events, it's not meant to be taken 100% seriously. We can infer he still does have a larger stomach and is able to store way more food in there, but it's not that unrealistic. Which brings us back, finally, to the actual campaign this section is about. Artificer does a bad job of justifying her powers. Artificer has the power of a fucking double jump, a shockwave, and making explosive. So how does she have them? Don't know. Okay, to be fair, a double jump isn't the most absurd power a rain witch can have. We already seen something close to that with the Cyan Lizards. But where did she get them? She's definitely not a purpose organism like Hunter or Spearmaster, nor a godlike being similar to Saint. Her powers are also not as believable as Gourmands or even Rivulets for that matter. With Cyan Lizards, that's an entire species of lizard that has evolved from purpose organisms. With Artificer, that's a singular slugcat that's part of an established species that is not a descendant from a purpose organism. The two are not comparable. We had a lot of difficulty early on deciding exactly what Gourmand was going to be about, or if they even had a place in the story. In a way, we did both of these things, by putting Gourmand's existence intentionally in question. They are such a bizarre creature. Spearmaster, Rivulet, and even Artificer to some degree have some in-game explanation now. However, Gourmand's powers seem too extreme. How could they have such an endless supply of things? So an explanation exists, but we're just never given it. I would like to see Will directly explain to us exactly how Artificer got these powers, because it feels as though several leaps in logic would be made. Besides, even if an explanation did exist, it isn't provided in the game, and therefore I can ask all kinds of questions about the nature of her powers. Unless it is provided, and it's didn't catch it because of flaws in my research. So Artificer's powers make no sense, that's great. What's next? Oh, the rest of Artificer's story. It's actually pretty good. I made a video recently where I criticized Artificer as a parent, but her being a bad parent isn't a flaw in the story for one simple reason. Artificer is wrong. The story doesn't try to justify her brutal rampage. In fact, it directly criticizes it. The Metropolis Echo directly tells you that you're stuck in a cycle of wrath and destruction, and to find a way out while you still can. Killing the chieftain isn't a triumphant moment, it's a tragic one. You're solidifying yourself as a genocidal murderer whose only goal in life is to kill. There is no way back from that. But making a bad choice doesn't matter if you can't make a good one. So let's see the other ending. Basically, Artificer meets all the Echoes and finds herself at Karma 9, gets past the Guardians and ascends. Or fails to ascend? We get this great scene where she sees her children disappear again right in her arms. But then the art shows that she ascended? So which is it? I mean, obviously they couldn't show her as an Echo because that ruins the Saint review. I would argue that Artificer should have succeeded in ascending. While that does take away some of the tragedy of the campaign, it also makes so you can show that she ascended without creating problems. And it means that you can actually make a good choice. You can actually follow up on the Echo's words or find a way out if you still can. What is the point of the ending if she just fails again? Besides that, why did the citizens of the city ever need a drone to get in there? Yes, I know they did this because you're not meant to enter Metropolis as any other slugcat, but they could have made it make sense. If the citizens had to keep any creatures from entering the city, then I want to remind you that it was stated by the base game that by the time of the iterators, there was very little original flora and fauna left in the world, and most creatures present there were artificial. Why would the citizens need to protect themselves from creatures they created? It's not like people would move from one city to another because they're established to be very far away from each other, and why would they even want to? It's not like the citizens would leave the city, or at least not often enough for the drones to need to exist. Like, I assume they left to speak to Pebbles, but why even have the gate if the only distance you have to complete is this? Why not have a regular gate? May I remind you that the citizens were dependent on 5 Pebbles for all their vital resources, and that after the construction of the iterators, the land outside became uninhabitable for them. Also, like, if you're only gonna leave to go to Pebbles, then if I was putting the gate, I would make it like here or something, I don't know. Yes, it is an ID jump, but what does that mean? If it stores important data about the burden, what does that have to do with the gate? Why does it allow access to the city in the first place? As I mentioned, nobody would want to leave the city anyway for obvious reasons, so why even have the gate be locked like that? Yes, I know this all may seem inconsequential, but the drone is the only reason the campaign is able to play out as it does. So if it doesn't make sense, it's an issue. If you have to make it so that you can't go there as any other slacker, then have the gate be locked in Superior Master, then have Pebbles unlock it for artificers so that she can commit a genocide, and then have the gate collapse by the time of Hunter or something, and the scavs get there through some other entrance. Like, that's not a perfect solution, but at least it makes sense. Of course, another reason for the drone's existence is so that it gives Pebbles a reason as to not kill Artificer, but you could still have that without the drone. The campaign establishes that killing scavengers is beneficial to fight Pebbles, so just have it so that Pebbles allows Archer to run around killing scavengers, and you can have the same dynamic. The Artificer adds the unique Metropolis region. It's pretty good. The campaign concludes with the fight with the Scavenger Chieftain. He's way more tanky and aggressive than your usual Scavenger, but yes, it's a fight. Now, the thing with this is that while the boss doesn't die in one hit, you still do. I think that the devs intended this to be an aggressive showdown, but what really ends up happening is that you will just hide on the right side of the room and cheese the fight. And it's made even worse because of the runback to the boss fight. The closest shelter to the arena is either behind two scaffolds, so you'll just die on the way there, or it's after the long ass walk where scavengers can still spawn on the way there. So not only do you die in one hit, you can also die in one hit on the way to the arena. I don't think I need to explain why it's bad. For some reason, the devs also had a number of scavengers spawn on the left side of the room. Not really a 1v1 now, is it? So those are pretty much all the issues I had with the Artificer. It's the best campaign in the DLC. It doesn't have as many issues as all the other ones, and most of the issues I have aren't directly tied to character actions and plot events. So let's get to the next one. Rivulet is very complicated to talk about at length. The gameplay changes are really cool. When it comes to the abilities, he's way faster and more agile than all the other Slug Cats, while having increased land capacity and swing speed. The most important change it makes to the world is that rain arrives way earlier than it does in every other campaign, so you have to move and act quicker because the world will be way more flooded than it usually is. And I find that change to be very cool. The campaign adds two unique regions, the Rod and Submerged Superstructure. So the Rod is a pretty mediocre region. It's not bad, but nothing special. I do think it does its one job of showcasing how fucked Pebbles is very well. Although it does bring up an issue I have with these future versions of regions. Well, the rooms in Rainworld are connected with pipes. They have fixed connections between them. How does a new pipe just activate when a region is falling apart? This pipe wasn't there before, so how is it just here now? How was City Conduit not mentioned ever before? Outside of it, it's fine. Great care was taken to keep room layouts and connections consistent across different variants of the same region, such as with the 5 Pebbles, Rod, and Silent Construct regions. Although you do have access to a lot more rooms in the Rod compared to 5 Pebbles. The degradation of the terrain opens up new passages and allows you to access essentially the back rooms and inner mechanisms of parts of Pebbles' structure. I'm not a scientist, so I may be wrong about this, but that seems like a weird inverse effect of how the route usually works. Because you're telling me that the route exposed passages that weren't accessible before, but isn't the point of the route that it grows, expands, and consumes? It would conceal pipes and sure as hell wouldn't expose new ones. Submerged superstructure is great. It took the iterator can submerge in water idea and executed it perfectly, and it tests Reeves' swimming abilities really well. This is the one region that can actually have massive rooms filled with water, and it does it well. It has everything I would want from a region like that. I sure hope that a certain someone didn't say some bullshit about it.
Submerged superstructure is a nightmarish labyrinth where everything looks the same and it's all underwater.
Huh? What do you mean a nightmarish labyrinth? What? I mean, yeah, the region is big, but the main thing you're here for is like in the middle of it, so you shouldn't really get lost here. Everything looks the same. What do you mean by that? Like, yeah, of course, rooms in a single region are gonna look similar if you only show a single room. But what you elect not to mention is the fact that the region is composed of like 4 different subregions with wildly different looks to them. I'm gonna show you 4 different screenshots from regions, and one of them is gonna be from Submerged, while 3 of them are from another region. All of them are from Submerged, by the way. Submerged is absolutely diverse in its visuals.
Same and it's
Everything is
all
underwater. How is that bad? Are we seriously complaining that the Rivulet region is submerged in water? Well, that's pretty much it for the regions. This campaign also introduces multiple creatures that are specifically made to hinder your progress in water. Aquapids aren't bad, but not outstanding. They are just a centipede variant that thrives in water. Wait, that seems familiar. The eels are also cool. Estacia a lizard variant that primarily exists in hunts in water. Wait, that seems familiar. The giant jellyfish are cool and unique though. Estacia have a stationary water creature. It's different from all the other water creatures. So we're almost done with the gameplay. What's left? Oh yeah, the reflection cell. I'm not a particular fan of taking away your hands because you can't use your hands to eat or grab weapons. Hunter did that bullshit too, and it was bad there too. But Rivulet is worse because it takes away both your hands this time. A huge problem I have with these get this thing there quests is that the fact that it's very easy to lose this stuff. Snails and lizards can stun you, it can fall into a bottom speed. Yeah, there are ways of getting that stuff back, but it's just wasting time. Which is especially bad if the main focus of your campaign is a fucking time limit. Another time. Another thing with the refraction cell is that it's coded in a way where it'll just bounce around so much for zero reason, so it's even more likely you'll lose it. Okay, now what about this story? I guess I should start with Pebbles and Moon since that's the better one. Now, yeah, there are issues with the dialogue, but to give Sober Cafe some credit, this is like one of the few things you can agree on. This is a valid criticism of the DLC Sober Cafe makes in the video. Good job. But outside of the dialogue, the thing they do with Pebbles and Moon is actually pretty good. I do think that Pebbles' arc is pretty cool with the redemption and stuff. This campaign is where I would argue the dynamic between the two is at its strongest. So yeah, that's pretty good. Now, let's talk about Rivulet's character, also known as the Watcher 2.0, or I guess the Watcher is Rivulet 2.0. Because with everything that happens in the campaign, I'm asking myself, why the fuck is this guy doing, like, anything? And also, who is he and where did he come from? Given that the DLC leaves Rivulet's past ambiguous, we are not given concrete information. So I'm going to tackle the two theories that I think are the most probable. The first one, Rivulet is a regular slug cat. I guess that the implication is that he comes from some faraway land. Like, if you are accepting that different lizard species exist, we can agree that different slug cat species could also reasonably exist all around the world. But then, why does Rivulet do anything in the campaign? Like, yeah, sure, Pebbles tells him to grab the cell and go to Moon, but doesn't he actually do that? Why would Rivulet risk his life for someone he doesn't know? The campaign also implies that Monk gave the cloak and neurons to Moon, but I can buy he would do that because at least Monk was established to be nice, strong in spirit, empathetic to its creatures, and he jumps after Survivor into the pit. Given that neither of the other Slackcasts did that, I think it's pretty special. And with Moon specifically, she controlled the Overseer and helped him when he was lost and alone, pointing him to food and safety and warning him of threats. Monk and Survivor both had a relationship established with Moon, and with the specific kindness of Monk, I can buy he would do that. Yet, even with that relationship, Survivor didn't do anything for Moon. I do not believe Rivulet would bring the cell to Moon because no such relationship was built here. Like, there is the whole please do this for me dialogue from Pebbles, but that's at their first end meeting with no prior development. Just Pebbles asking Rivulet to do this for him does not mean it's in character for Rivulet. The same way that Gourmand wouldn't bring Nearest to Moon because why would he? And no, the campaign acknowledging this doesn't actually make it good writing. Rivulet starts off with the mark, but I don't view them as necessarily having been raised or trained as a messenger by an actor similar to Hunter Spearmaster. They've made contact with him for sure though. Rivulet is an adventurous, curious and agile slacker that travels long distances across the land, and I imagine they've gotten into all sorts of wacky adventures even prior to the start of their campaign. Proceeding now illustrate the zone fate course of a giant biological supercomputer and revitalize the broken body of fallen god? Maybe that's just another day in the life of Rivulet. So I guess Rivulet did that for the love of the game. If that's another day in the life of Rivulet, then you would expect him just fuck off the moment he succeeds. Why did Rivulet stick around for so long if all he wants is a good adventure? If you want to tell me that Rivulet stayed with Moon because he got attached to her, then that doesn't work. Once again, no relationship was built up in between the two. Literally, their entire development happened off-screen between the revealed ending and this conversation. But that doesn't work either because he should have just left. So that possibility is broken. What's the other one? The second one is that Rivulet is a purpose organism made specifically for this task, and sent by some iterator from very far away. In that case, Rivulet helping Pebbles would make sense, and it explains why he has the mark of communication, and the power in his stomach, that very conveniently has the schematic of an iterate you can similar to Pebbles, with a path to the core highlighted. But then, how was Rivet made anyway? Okay, so for this I will actually have to lay out all of the information that the game provides about purpose organisms. The last one known to be created by an iterator in this part of the world is Hunter. Now, if you remember, Hunter had the rod due to equipment eroding. For all we know, no significant harassment did not have the rod or any other external issues, so throughout the entire timeline he was just a regular iterator. If he can create a proper purpose organism, then I would argue that no other iterator would be reasonably able to create one either. And you need to remember that Rivet takes place after numerous time skips, in which 5 pebbles got overrun by the rod, started to produce way more rain, and after the world already evolved to adapt to that world state. That's pretty fucking long if you ask me. Obviously, there are older and newer iterators, and Ensage's age isn't established anywhere, but if no significant harassment is just your average iterator, then I'm not buying that even the newest of the iterators would be capable of making Rivulet, a perfectly fine organism with plenty of adaptations that's way more complex than Hunter and would have had to travel a way further distance. Rivulet's character makes no sense no matter how you look at it. And that's sad because it directly undermines the story of Pebbles and Moon, a story that's pretty good on its own. Seamaster is not as bad as Rivulet. His abilities, motivation, and character are actually explained this time. The ability to make spears is nice, the change of feeling through them is pretty cool. Spearmaster is arguably the most balanced of the slug cats given that all he can do is make spears. The campaign introduces 3 new regions. One of them is a past version of Garbage Wastes. And once again, I have no idea how the connections work in this world. Garbage wastes falling apart does not mean that this pipe is suddenly active. Outside of that, I don't really care for it. The next one is Waterfront Facility. It's just past shoreline, and I find that concept to be cool. It was also executed well. The Precipice is good. This is just Chimney Canopy if it was an actually good area, and I find the wall section of it to be pretty good too. The third one is Looks to the Moon. I like this region's concept. Its functioning looks to the moon. I love pebbles in the exterior. They're pretty much my favorite regions from the base game, but this region doesn't really understand what made the exterior and 5 pebbles so good to begin with. My main issue with it is the lack of grapple worms in the lower section of the region. That was the main mechanic of the underhang and the leg, and it's not present in this region. The grapple worms were what made the parkour so fun in the exterior, and to remove them and still have the parkour is not great. And it also has way more creature spawns to hinder that parkour. The iterator side of the region is also not good. It has absolutely no threats present barring a few coils. You could go through the entire region without seeing any threats whatsoever. I know people like to shit on 5 pebbles, but at least that region was able to use the DLLs to create threats, and it used the unique nature of the anti-gravity to change how you approach them. The only creatures Lux the Moon has are the inspectors. They're supposed to make eating harder by protecting neuronflies, but there's way more rooms with neuronflies in them than there is inspectors, so that doesn't work. Inspectors were created to solve an issue testers reported very early in the development of Moon's standing structure. Without that long legs, it's boring and lacks threads. While not providing the exact same type of hazard as a DLL, inspectors can hold their own while angered, creating a scoundrel-like dynamic where angering them provokes a zero-gravity spear fight, making players at least think twice before they eat neurons. But that's exactly the thing. They are neutral. They are only a threat if that player chooses to make them one. An average player is already familiar with reputation as a mechanic and will have way more than enough experience to make the inspectors completely pointless as a mechanic. If they were created to solve the threat problem, then you did a bad job of it. Rather than being scavenger-like, they are much more similar to the garbage worms. Except garbage worms would still pose a threat even if you didn't anger them by taking away your spears. Looks to the Moon is what people say 5 pebbles is. And then again, I like the idea. The submerged superstructure references, the city view, Moon's chamber, etc., etc. But those things don't really work if I don't have fun going through the region. The region feels as though it prioritizes references and similarities before good gameplay. So those are all the regions. I also have an issue with the Pearl quest. I already expressed why those don't work, but for some ungodly reason you can't even store the pearl in your stomach. You need to hold it in your hand. It doesn't help that this quest lasts for like 2/3 of the campaign. Why even give me the option to hold 2 spears if you're just gonna take my second hand away for the rest of it? There's also the fact that the story doesn't have a region to end it off. You just go to communication array, and broadcast the Pearl. Spearmaster is the only Slaka to not have an ending region. Gormand has Outer Expanse, Artificer has Metropolis, Rivulet has Submerged Superstructure, and Saint has Rubicon. Spearmaster has Sky Islands, and that makes the ending kinda underwhelming. I feel as though Spearmaster definitely should have had one. Maybe connected to Sky Islands or something? If you want to tell me that making another region would have stood outside the budget, then I guess. After all, it's like there is a single massive region in the DLC that is completely pointless, that didn't need to exist or something. But this was pretty much everything to do with the gameplay. Now, as for the story, I don't even know what to say. So I suppose we should turn to Sorbet Cafe once again. I actually agree that the broadcasts are shit and break the immersion. There was definitely a good idea in there. We could have been seeing the last days of Lux Moon and how all the other iterators reacted to them. Maybe they tried to help, maybe they just didn't care. These are certainly interesting questions to be asked. We could have been observing Moon's vain efforts to stop Pebbles and her gradual collapse. In fact, the entire campaign is one last vain effort to stop Pebbles. And yeah, the broadcasts do that, but they do that in the form of literally stopping everything so that you can read the broadcasts. There isn't a reason in lore as to why they exist, nor is it established why Spearmaster can read them, so it's basically meta-narration. The game is stopping to tell the viewer directly, hey, this is happening now, It doesn't help that the broadcasts have the same dialogue problems as the rest of the dialogue in DLC. But as always with Sorbet Cafe, a good point needs to be balanced with a bad one. Spearmaster's campaign has the issue of lacking a meaningful narrative. It's fan service where you get to see a pre-collapse Moon and angry Five Pebbles, but don't actually have any impact on the world or go through a personal journey. While I can agree with the notion that the Spearmaster campaign doesn't have any consequences on the larger world, I would argue that it doesn't need them. Not every campaign needs to massively change the world. In fact, the only campaigns with meaningful consequences on the world are Hunter, Rivulet, and Saint. Gourmand starts the Survivor and Monk campaigns, but they don't do anything in the story either. And Artificer is mostly self-contained, with its only consequence being the disappearance of scavengers from the wall. I think that Sorbet Cafe is able to see that the campaign exists, but didn't stop to think why it exists. The YouTuber knows that we get to meet Angry Pebbles and Tricolapse Moon, but doesn't understand why we get to do that. So to explain that, the main plotline of Downpour is the story of Five Pebbles and Lux to the Moon, with Pebbles taking the center stage for the most of it. The base game previously established that due to his drive to find a solution, he killed Lux to the Moon and set himself to die. During the events of the Downpour DLC, he gets something to the effect of a redemption arc. In the Rivet campaign, he chooses to give the refraction cell to Moon, to prolong her life, even if it means his own death. When we meet him in Saint, he is a destroyed, barely conscious being, while Moon is better than ever. Fates have been flipped. He has finally paid for his mistakes and redeemed himself. However, to buy into this redemption, we have to know how he progressed and how he was before. While the base game did that, I would argue that if this arc is supposed to work, we need to see more of it. And it is important to mention that without Spearmaster, the earliest we see him chronologically is the Artificer campaign, in which he's way nicer than he should be at this point. That isn't a problem with that campaign, but it does throw a wrench into his redemption arc. Because now we are supposed to believe he grew and learned, yet in his very first chronological appearance, he's just as nice as he is later on. And that is why Spearmaster needed to exist. We had to see Pebbles at his absolutely worst for the story to work. And while we're on that, we can also add the weight to Moon's collapse by seeing how she and all the other iterators reacted to it, not just seeing her after it already occurred. Whether it was executed well or not is up to debate, but that was fundamentally the purpose of this Spearmaster campaign. The campaign did have narrative weight and definitely was way more meaningful outside of being just fan service, which it definitely was to some extent. My point here is that it wasn't just fan service and had an actual purpose in the story beyond it. It still kind of fixes a problem it created, but at least it fixes it. That was pretty much everything I had to say about Spearmaster. It's probably second best behind Artificer. The only thing I really did in this section was shitting on Sorbet Cafe, so that's neat. The final campaign of the game. I mean, it's commonly regarded as the best campaign by many, so surely they must be right. And Saint would be the pinnacle of great writing and story. No! This is the worst campaign by far! Let's start with the gameplay. Saint has a tongue that he can use to swing around, which is actually kinda nice. I don't find it as fun as grapple worms, but it's still cool. However, that mobility comes at an expense of not being able to throw spears or eat meat. Those abilities are handled pretty well by the game, and they are pretty balanced all things considered. I would say that the cold mechanic is really well done and utilized, so good job on that. The campaign has you starting in Sky Island stuck on Karma 2, and you have to find multiple echoes to reach Karma 10 and then ascend. After reaching Karma 10, Saint gains the abilities of Flight and Insta-Kill. Given the region you're supposed to use them in, they aren't that OP. With these abilities, you can choose to ascend either Moon, Pebbles, or both of them. The campaign adds 3 new regions. I'm going to save the Rubicon discussion for later since it damages the story more than the gameplay. Silent Construct is really cool. Seeing a destroyed Iterator amidst the snow world is neat. The reveal is amazing and one of the best aspects of the campaign in general. Just a small nitpick here, but the region has 2 destroyed versions of the same room. Both TLA-30 and TLA-39 are the destroyed version of the room UVA-13. It's not really that big of a deal since it isn't consequential to the story, but it's a small thing I wanted to point out. Okay, so I was actually fully done writing this script and I came across this community node. This room is a bit of a fun fake out to players without a good memory of the wall. A lot of testers were confused at first why this section of the wall doesn't match the one we climbed on earlier Slack cuts. The real answer is really simple. It's not. 5 pebbles is just really big. The usual wall collapsing in exactly this place would be way too convenient. Of course, you can find the site of 5 pebbles we are all used to. So I guess this room just comes from an entire different section of the wall and isn't meant to be the same room. But honestly, this is so funny. Bro says that, oh no, that part of the wall crashing here will be way too convenient. But that part is also accessible, it's just conveniently crashed in a different spot. Wait, that makes it even worse, because now not only is that part of Pebbles conveniently crash here, another part of Pebbles that coincidentally pretty much identical to it also happened to crash here. And the undergrowth is also pretty cool. It has the problem of fibers activating out of nowhere, but still pretty good, all things considered. But the story is where the major problems begin, and is the reason why I consider this campaign to be the worst one by far. So far, every campaign had unique problems of their own. Gorman did irreparable damage to the world, Artificer's powers were terribly explained, Rivulet's character was terrible and didn't make any sense, and Sirius's story was told in a dogshit way. Saint combines all of these issues into one. So who is Saint and what does he want? I don't know. Just like Rivulet, the DLC leaves his past ambiguous, so there isn't really anything there. But why with Rivulet I was able to go off on different possibilities to show how he didn't make sense? With Saint I have no idea who Saint even is. I don't even have any theories to debunk other than one. The only one I have is that I guess he was created by like an iterator or something. But does this make any sense? Because not only does the action of the campaign take place exclusively on the grounds of Pebbles, Saint is directly shown to be attached to this ground specifically and literally cannot leave. Even if he could leave, if he ascends in a completely different part of the world, then will he come back as an echo in that part of the world or in this space specifically? I'm saying all that because we are given zero reason as to why he would be in any way attached to this room or area, especially not enough to justify why he keeps coming back here as an echo. So we have no idea as to who Saint is. I guess you're supposed to assume that he's a fucking god who can do anything, like, sure, I guess. Now, what does Saint want? Once again, I don't know. My only guess would be that he wants to gain Camera 10 and then ascend everything or something. But then he directly contradicts that too. Because if you want to just go and kill stuff, then why the fuck would you go to Rubicon and try to ascend, when you already know that you're an echo and that it won't work? If you're trying to tell me that he doesn't know that it won't work, then obviously you can't ascend any creatures if you're fucking dead. This should be very basic knowledge. In fact, Saint trying to ascend doesn't make any sense because, like, I assume he doesn't want to ascend. This entire time I thought that the entire point of Rubicon is that he doesn't want to ascend. Like, that's why he's going up instead of down, that's why Void Lord burns him, and that's why he ascends the Void Worm. I'm assuming that the worm would have just helped him had he not done this shit. Which is why I am assuming that he could ascend but is choosing not to. Then still, why go to Rubicon? If your only motivation is to ascend everything with your powers, then why would you actively choose to reset your karma, lose your powers, and make it so that you have to gain them back? In fact, how does the echo thing even work? I assume it's like a time loop, which means that new playthroughs are simply new cycles for Saint. And if that's true, why the fuck would you choose to reset your progress and make it so that everyone who ascended is just back now and you're gonna ascend them again? Reminder, no one is forcing him to try to ascend, he chose to go to Rubicon. Saint's character, motivation, and literally everything about him is terrible and makes no sense. The campaign cannot go 5 seconds without contradiction itself. And with Saint there comes another thing I want to talk about. Remember when in my Water video I talked about how the rod was destroyed as a narrative device? Well, believe it or not, this DLC does the exact same thing with Ascension. Because Giving your character the ability to ascend anything will cause me to question the morality of that. Like, yeah, you ascend a lizard, but what if it didn't want to ascend? Like, what if Saint just started ascending a bunch of other slugcats or something? In fact, the same fucking campaign has the Undergrowth Echo, which says this, quote, I did not have to will to depart, nor the desire. Why did they always search for an escape as if we were imprisoned? What offering from the void could usurp the gift of life already given? This moment right here is where we are meant to be. And like, yeah, obviously, not every creature wants to ascend as was shown in the same DLC. That was the entire point of the Gourmand campaign. Yet, unlike Artificer, the campaign never brings this up or calls Saint out for being a mass murderer. In fact, it seems to be treating Saint as a hero? Like, the whole ascends others yet can ascend himself thing, as in he chooses to not ascend in order to ascend others. I have no idea how these extremely contradictory ideas were written in this plan of the very same DLC. Hell, in the very same campaign. Like, we're supposed to cheer for Saint when he ascends stuff, but then you're also telling me that not every creature wants to ascend? So the ascension is kind of broken in this campaign. What else? Oh yeah, the echoes make zero sense. Saint is an echo and it can walk, speak to creatures, kill stuff, traverse the world, affect the real world, and even try to ascend? Huh? Like, I always assumed that echoes would always be stuck in one place and aren't able to move around, no matter why they turned into an echo. 6 grains of grapple doesn't seem to be stuck in this place because they have an attachment to it. I mean, that's ambiguous. But if you want to tell me that Saint is a very different echo from all the others because he wants to ascend stuff, then why can't he choose to reset his progress and lose the very powers he needs to ascend things? There isn't anything forcing him to gain Karma 10 as far as we know. Matter of fact, who the fuck are all these new echoes that appear here? Where was the one in Bitter Area in the Reveal campaign? Nothing changed in Bitter Area in Saint. Where was the one in Shoreline doing any other campaign? Its story doesn't revolve around anything related to Saint. Moon was already collapsed since like 4 campaigns by now, so where was it? Where was the drainage system one this entire time? If you want to tell me that it only started existing because drainage got overgrown, then fine. But the farmer race and the outer expanse already existed far before that and also fit the forgotten place overgrown with plants thing. The farmer's echo in Saint confirms that echoes will still persist even when they are attached to changes. And 6 grains still exist even though 5 levels fell. So where is the shaded echo? Shaded being destroyed shouldn't matter if I'm to believe the words of the farmer race echo. So the only thing I'm getting out of this is that it's all completely arbitrary, and the writers just did whatever they wanted. Also, I don't think the echoes should really exist in a fucking time loop, but whatever. Alright, so I wanna lay out actually why all these things are an issue because I don't feel like I really did that in the video. So okay, I'm going to visualize you this by like drawing a line of how this actually works. So we have essentially 2 timelines, okay? This is one for like the explanation for echoes that the rest of the game provides, and this like the Saint one. So with this one, like after you ascend, you continue existing like on this timeline just as an echo, and so you get to like watch as the land changes, your opinions can change, your outlook on the world can change, etc., etc. This is the one that's like consistent with actually the base game, with like the shaded echo and all the other ones. This is the one from like Saint, where after you ascend, you essentially go back in time to some vague point that isn't defined, and you simply live out this part of your life until ascension again. And I think that the like implication from Saint as to how it actually works is that like Saint opinion can change or like can't take different actions. So like Saint will just always gain Karma 10 and try to go to Rubicon and ascend. Like, I assume that that's how it works. But if you notice, this and this are both completely different explanations as to how like the echo thing actually works, and yet they are both like shown to be the definitive explanation as to how it works. So, you know, this is really ideal. I have no idea which DLC did more damage to the echo as a concept between the Watcher and Downpour now, because they are both fundamentally broken. But now is a good time to focus on another thing that's fundamentally broken. Rubicon makes no sense. So what is Rubicon? Once again, I have no idea. Well, it's not a dream, or definitely not Saint, because how does Saint know about Shaded Citadel, or the Underhang, or even the Depths? Because that's destroyed. There was no possible way he saw those regions. It's not like it's made only out of destroyed rooms, because it has rooms from Outskirts, Farmeries, and Sky Islands. There isn't really any rhyme or reason as to what rooms appear in the region, which means that the only reason the rooms that were chosen is because, hey, look, it's the Sky Islands room. Clap. Look, it's the drainage system room. It's that shoreline room, underhang, memory cubes, Alligator Turkan, 5 pebbles. Look, I appreciate fan service. It's really cool. But you can do fan service and make sense at the same time. This is exactly the same thing as with the water. How can I talk about any of this when I have no idea what's even happening? But that doesn't really make for a compelling story. A huge problem with this style of writing is that the people will have to assume that the story makes perfect sense. Because when making a theory, you never know whether a contradiction you find was purposely put there by the writers to tell you that your theory is wrong, or is simply a result of bad writing present in the campaign, and any flaws you can find will inevitably be dismissed as you simply not understanding the story, even though no one actually does. There is one more thing I want to talk about, and that is everything to do with Pebbles and Moon. I like Pebbles and Moon in this campaign. Their story is over and makes sense for them to not be that important and to take a backseat in the narrative. After all, Five Pebbles' redemption is still relevant, and will not be totally undermined by this very campaign. So anyway, the campaign goes on to undermine Five Pebbles' redemption. The Five Pebbles and Moon being ascended is fucking abysmal. That was the worst possible way you could have gone with these characters moving forward from Rivulet, because now nothing matters anymore. Fibrous arc had no consequences, because now you're telling me that after all that development and his final sacrifice to prolong Moon's life, he suffered nothing. He's still able to be ascended by Saint despite being in such a bad state. Just like Moon. After all that effort from everyone to get her the core, to prolong her life, she just dies in her very next appearance. She finally gets into a semi-functional state and amounts to nothing. What the fuck was even the point of Rivulet if both of these motherfuckers would just get ascended by Saint, regardless of any actions they took in the very next campaign? Saint makes the Rivulet campaign completely irrelevant to the ending of the story. And for what? For them to meet in Rubicon and say some vague stuff about how their entire existence was for nothing. Which is a cool moment, don't get me wrong, but it still undermines Rivulet. These characters have already contacted each other and fixed their friendship. There is no further development left for them. The only way to make this worse would be have Moon be dead and they say some shit like, you know, the whole Five Pebbles corruption scandal, Rivulet, all that. That's why Lux the Moon died. In my opinion, it would have hit infinitely harder if you just made it so that Pebbles is dead, similar to Moon in Hunter, and you cannot send him. And then in Rubicon, it's just Moon that tells you that Pebbles isn't here or something. Like, that's not perfect, but at least Pebbles actually means something this time. Have it so that Pebbles' actions were the thing that allowed Moon to ascend, and the ones that stopped himself from being able to ascend. Also, where is Rivulet? I know Moon acknowledges him being taken away with the passage of time, but what does that mean? Isn't this the same world in which creatures literally cannot die? If they can just die of old age, then what the fuck is the point of anything any character does in the game to break the cycle? Apparently, all they had to do was just wait long enough. All of this is why I think this is the worst campaign. Unlike all the other ones, Saint doesn't have any redeeming factors. At least with Gourmand, I liked his characters in Outer Expanse. With Artificer, I liked the story. With Livia, the dynamic between Five Rules and Moon was nice. And at least Spearmore's characters made sense. Saint is just broken all throughout. But it's all fine because of fan service and because we got to see collapsed Pebbles and I clapped. So my main points throughout this video were that 1. The retaining wall breaks all campaigns in the game. The facility routes deal major damage to the campaigns of Survivor and Monk. The Outer Expanse region has plenty of visual clutter. Artificer's powers make no sense. The Sin ID draws make no sense. The Scavenger Chieftain fight is heavily flawed. The second Artificer ending is inconsistent. Rivulet's entire character makes no sense whatsoever. The Rare Faction Cell doesn't work as a quest. The Sphero's broadcast make no sense. The Pearl Quest doesn't work as a quest. Lux the Moon is a bad region. The character of Saint is fundamentally broken in every aspect. Rubicon makes no sense, it messes up the echoes, it damages Pebbles and Moon's story, it's thematically inconsistent in the way it chooses to have throat ascension, along with many smaller points which I won't mention right now. But outside of that, the DLC is perfect and a masterpiece. With all that said, there is one more question to be asked. Is Downpour better than The Watcher? They are both heavily flawed. I would say that they are pretty much the same in gameplay, as in they both don't have that many problems with it. I would say that they are comparable in the music and visuals department. When it comes to the story, my main thoughts here are that it all boils down to whether you prefer a story that has plenty of ups and downs and sort of balances itself in the middle because of that, or a story that simply refuses to do anything at all and is therefore really inoffensive. I think that Downpour has bigger flaws, but also higher highs than The Water, and that The Water has smaller flaws, but nothing as good as Downpour's highs. I would say that Downpour slightly edges out The Water because of its nature. You can sort of ignore the issues of other campaigns and focus on one specific one. Each campaign individually has less issues than The Watcher, but in the whole of it, it's pretty comparable. Like, Artificer on its own is better than the Watcher campaign, but Downpour as a whole is comparable to the Watcher as a whole. If I were to rank every campaign, it would probably be something like Saint, the Watcher, Inf, Gourmand, Revealed Spearmaster, Artificer. Inf is just as inoffensive as the Watcher. At least those lacas don't directly break the story or make other campaigns worse. And Saint is the only one I would consider to be worse than mediocre. So those were all my thoughts on Downpour, and there were many of them. If you liked the video, then consider subscribing. If you didn't like the video, then please wish me death in the comments and dislike the video. There is one more thing I want to say. I'm done. I will not make a single other Rainworld video ever again. I originally made these videos because I wanted to share criticisms surrounding the game in order to help make it better as it progressed. However, now I see that that was fundamentally pointless. We are way past that, up to a point where I genuinely don't think it can ever improve. The devs have gathered a group of glazers big enough to where they can make anything without experiencing any backlash, and so I'm not excited for any other installments that this series will offer in the future. I don't think any future things that will come out have the capacity of being well written. As of The Watcher, I don't trust either the Downpour or the Watcher crew with the writing, but also because every single concept that the base game introduced was already either explored or ruined in the subsequent DLCs. I genuinely don't know where you could possibly take the story from here, and I am not prepared to see my favorite game of all time be damaged any further. I will probably still play whatever next comes out, but I won't make a video on it. So this is my last video I will ever make of this game.